What's up, guys, and welcome back to Beyond the Void Horror Podcast. My name is Alex, and today we're going to be doing a spoiler-free review of a movie that's kind of like a remake by the same director, and that movie is Malum. Let's get into it. So I've always been a big fan of this movie, Last Shift. In fact, I had Anthony DiBlasi, the director of this movie, come on and actually speak about his movie. And he's done other movies that I really enjoy too, including one about Clive Barker's short story called Dread, which I thought he did a fantastic job on as well. This one was one of my favorite movies. It's got a very demonic thing about it. And Last Shift, I thought was a really good indie film that he did an excellent job with some really good, genuinely creepy scares that weren't all jump scares or anything like that. Fast forward to today, we have a brand new movie today that has just come out on VOD. It was in the theaters, but I was unable to catch it where I was. Malum is essentially a remake of the movie that delves a lot deeper into the lore of Last Shift while hitting some of the same beats, but also doing its own new thing in a lot of different ways. So what is Malum all about? Well, it has a similar story to the Last Shift, of course, but this one is about a rookie cop who is basically doing her first shift as a last shift on a decommissioned police station where they're moving it from one place to another place, and she has to kind of keep night watch on it, the same night watch that her father did when he encountered a terrible event that happened and he was a part of many years ago when she was a child. And of course, she is dealing with the mysterious connection between her father's death and a really dark, messed up, demonic cult. This movie, of course, as I mentioned, is directed by Anthony DiBlasi, who's also had his writing partner, Scott Poiley. We get new stars in the film. That is the main girl who plays the rookie officer is different from the Last Shift movie, which is played by Jessica Sula, who does a fantastic job, I think, in this role. I think she's a very good actress, and boy, does she go through the ringer on this one. Now, there are a couple of familiar faces in this movie, but they're not like main characters that I recall or remember. There are some similar situations from Last Shift, but this is definitely a different movie than the first one. For me, I think this is important to kind of break this up into a couple of different ways. I'm, of course, not going to spoil the movie for anybody, but I'm going to kind of present this in a way that will honor both people who have seen The Last Shift, might enjoy it, as well as those who might just come into this for the first time and only see it. I always highly recommend you check out the first film because I really truly do love this film. I think it's a great film, and I was curious how this one was going to be compared to it, so there are going to be some of those comparisons in here. First off, can I say that it's any better? I think it's ultimately very different than the first film. There are a lot of scenes that are very similar to the first movie, and they kind of go over some of the same beats, but it really is a different beast altogether. It is a very familiar atmosphere and one that Anthony DiBlasi does a really good job here. Although I will say that there are a little bit more jump scares in this one than I was expecting, but there are still some of the tried and true slow burn kind of scares that are in this movie. But ultimately, this is a much bigger movie with a much bigger story and a much bigger background, while still somewhat being kind of mysterious about what is happening, so that it kind of keeps you lured all the way to the end. Now, one thing I will say is that the first movie, a lot of people had issue with the very end of the movie because it was kind of a tropey ending that I can't say, and I can see that that might be something that a lot of people might have an issue with. Here, I think they do a better ending on this, and it kind of is a little bit more, I don't know, there's something more to it here in this movie, which I think is awesome. But they do some other new things here with some new characters. There's an entire scene that we didn't get to see that was in the first movie that is dealing with this police officer who they have now connected to the main character, which is the Jessica Lauren, who has a a father who was in a police officer, and she's kind of following in his footsteps years later, but he has been a part of some sort of tragedy that I won't spoil for you. But that's really cool that they added that into this movie, because it really just adds so much more to this movie. I will say that there are some moments in the first film that I really did feel a little bit more uneasy with than I did in this one, but this one is just a very different feel. And sometimes, if you've ever seen the movie Baskin, it is a movie that is very much like this film. There's a lot of very surrealistic, nightmarish scenes that are happening in a single location that has layers upon layers, and as you descend slower and slower and slower, things get worse and worse as you're sort of descending into this madness and descending into this particular hell that Malum creates. So this one has a little deeper hell to it than I think the first movie does, but some of the sort of scare gags or scenes and setups might be a little stronger in the first film, I think, but there are some really good moments in this new one too. It's very difficult for me to go, which one's better? Honestly, I just like both of them, and I honestly think that they're both worth watching. I think some of the gore in this film, there was one particular scene that was really messed up. There was a couple of really dark, gory scenes that I think really kind of played well into this movie. And this movie just kind of hits the gas and keeps going. It's like it progressively gets wilder and crazier and more insane as the movie progresses. There's kind of things about this one that I liked less than the first movie, and there's kind of things that I loved about this movie that I didn't get in the first movie. So I think when Anthony DiBlasi says they're a bunch of very different films, I think that's what he means. Like, there's things in this movie that excel and things in the other movie that excel, and I think you can watch them in succession with each other, and I think it would still be great experiences for both. Now, I've seen people with different reviews all over the board on this movie, and it's understandable because these movies are very different from one another, so there's going to be people on both sides of the fence that are going to be like, wow, it's not as good as the first, or maybe this one's better, or maybe the first one was always better. But ultimately, I think they're both very competent films. Anthony DiBlasi definitely, and Scott Poyley actually do deliver some really great lore and characterization. The acting, I think, is a little bit better in this one in some regards, while some of the characters in the first one I really liked too. Some of the scare gags in the first one, it's very different, so it's hard to say. But I think if you like movies that are like Baskin, and you liked Last Shift, I think Malum kind of pulls a little bit of the two together in this sort of surrealistic, dreamscapey nightmare world that Anthony DiBlasi's carrying. If you like supernatural films with a little bit more physicality to it, that instead of just like ghostly things happening, this is very much like a demonic kind of movie in a way. There are some creatures that are in here, some pretty cool creature effects, and some of the practical effects that are very gnarly in this film. I'm definitely hoping that they put out a Blu-ray for this release, because I will definitely be picking up a copy of this. It's unfortunate that we only had so many select theaters for this particular movie, because I really wanted to catch it in the theater, and I think it would have been a fun experience to have that. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think this is probably about a 7.5. I do need to watch it again. And I think that's kind of around what I felt with Last Shift. It was like about a 7.5, almost an 8. They're very competent, very good independent films that, you know, have some style about them, that do some different things that you're not going to see in the mainstream, but it has elements of it that are a little bit more physical, with the elements of the cult and this police station that is turning into hell. Some other comparisons I could make are like The Void and maybe, you know, Baskin, because they kind of have this atmosphere about them that is like you're going slower and lower and lower into hell. Definitely think it's worth a watch to find out. I personally don't think there's many movies like this out there, and I kind of like it when it comes to these kind of supernatural films, because they aren't just, oh, a cup moved. It's like, no, there's a bucket of blood on this girl's face, and when you see that scene, man, whoo, that's a pretty gnarly scene. There was some added effects in there involving fingers that I will not spoil for you, but when you see it, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. A movie that is kind of built for me in a way, and it might not be for everybody, and there are going to be people who are going to be super particular about the first movie for versus this one, and they're going to turn it into a debate over that, which is, you know, pretty normal. But I think if you're just kind of open to it and a new experience, and it is from the same director, so I mean, it's not like he's trying to shit on the Last Shift movie. It's just more of what you enjoyed, I guess, with a different kind of vibe going for it. But they also kind of refined some of the creature work in this. There was a scene involving a dark cell and a flashlight in the first movie that is one of my favorite scare moments in a film, and I don't think they actually did it justice as much in this film, but it does work in a very familiar but different way in this film too. So it's really up in the air what you're gonna think. You might have a lower score than the first film, but I still think it's well within the range of enjoyable if you enjoyed The Last Shift. And if you're coming into this brand new and have never seen either of these films, I think there's plenty of enjoyment and blood and gru and crazy, uncomfortable, supernatural stuff going on in this film to make you interested. Very physical, very bloody, very disturbing, and there is a lot of stuff going on that builds and builds and builds to the very bloody end. So I rented it for $15. You can buy it for $20 or rent it for $15. It is up on all your digital places. I didn't find it on Amazon though, so you may have to look on like Vudu, Microsoft, iTunes, and I think it was on YouTube. There's the HD and the standard definition. I think the standard definition brings it down a few bucks. But yeah, let me know what you think. Were you a fan of The Last Shift like I am? Have you big expectations for this film? I think if you go in with just a kind of even keel, ready to experience something new, but not exactly like you did in the first one, I think you're going to come out the other end with a good experience for the most part. Like, I really do like these kind of films, and I think if you're into supernatural, demonic, satanic kind of stuff with cults and shit, with blood, you really can't go wrong. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Please hit the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. And yeah, the little bell notification to let you know when I got a brand new video coming out. But thank you guys so much for coming by. And as always, long live the boys.